Hey everyone, welcome to the Tech Town Square. Your host, James Azar, with my co-host, the one, the only, the legend, Eddie Doyle.
James, how are you this week, man? It's been an insightful week in technology, hasn't it, for the Tech Town Square?
You know, it's been so much fun, I almost forgot how much fun is.
That's right. And ladies and gentlemen, it is fun for technologists like us because we love to solve problems. Humans love to solve problems. We're pattern-seeking creatures. Now, unfortunately, in the cyber world, when there are problems, it means there are victims. That's not fun. But what is fun is figuring out how these problems occurred and then preventing them from happening again. And hopefully we'll pass on a little bit of knowledge in this particular town square. It might be a little bit more appropriate for, I think, corporate leaders to kind of take a look at some of the technical details that we get into. But in general, ladies and gentlemen, it's going to be fun. We will unpackage a few very significant events, some hacks, solar winds. So what date are we today, James?
So we're 8 days before Christmas.
Right.
I think the calendar at this point, we don't say the date, we say how many days before Christmas.
That's right, exactly. It's kind of like Wednesday in the middle of the week. You know what? Yeah, I'm in the middle of the week. How many days before the weekend? So it's Wednesday of the year. We're counting our days to Christmas, and then and what are we gonna do? Are we gonna do one of these next week, or is it gonna be a little tight for Christmas? Should we see these guys in the new year?
I think we should see him next week. I know that you might be heading on a holiday.
Got cancelled. Thank you, COVID. I'll be with you next week.
So I think, and I think next week we'll maybe do an AMA, kind of ask me anything kind of segment, and talk a little bit about the holidays, and talk about this year and all the good stuff that comes with it, because it's a very challenging time right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And I think it's a confusing time as well because we're hearing about so here's the problem with vocabulary. You hear about, well, something got hacked. And so last week we spoke a little bit about our friends over at FireEye getting hacked. Today we understand more about that with the company SolarWinds. We're going to get into details. And then we hear about our voting system, something really precious to every citizen getting hacked. And then we also talk about, in my world, I talk about biohacks and hacking to get ahead in life. So I think we better unravel a little bit of that in our discussion today. And well, we'll have fun. We'll have fun to be sure. Where should we start, James? What do you think?
Well, so I'm sorry. I am just letting people know that they can comment below. But before we get started and start talking, here's a quick disclaimer, folks. Everything we say in this podcast, Eddie and myself, does not represent the companies that we're associated or work for. It is our own personal opinions. So just keep that in mind. This is a Tech Town Square. It is an open forum show. So we may express some opinions. You may agree or disagree with them. The point is, if you disagree, great, let us know why and explain your logic. And if you agree, wonderful, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, let us know you like the show, tell 2 or 3 of your friends about it, and bring them with you next week as we do the show. Okay? But again, all opinions expressed in this show are our own and do not reflect any organization or company we are associated with or work for.
Beautiful. Thank you for adding that. No, go ahead. You were going to say something. Go on.
So I want to say this. Let's start and have this conversation really around solar winds, because it kind of picks up where we left last week, which is the whole idea of FireEye, which is a cybersecurity company, experienced a nation-state attack against its infrastructure, and what was stolen wasn't data, but it was actual tools used on clients.
Now, tools, let's specify what those tools are for. These are threat hunting tools. This is why it's such a big deal.
Correct.
And by the way, notice what James said there. He said nation state attack. I want people to know that if a company, no matter how brilliant they are, is the target of what we call an advanced persistent threat, right, from a nation state, they're going to get in.
Yeah.
You're going to get in. Okay.
Well,
so it is not a reflection on the state of that company at all. I mean, I want to really make sure that's super clear with people, because you know what? The nation states have unlimited budgets and resources compared to corporations.
So yes, and it brings a whole different level of discussion. And I think this is the discussion we should have in the Tech Town Square today, which is what happens when you're a U.S. organization or a European organization who employs thousands of people, right? I think FireEye employs 40, 50, 60,000 people.
I'd be shocked if it's that many, but it's in the thousands. Maybe like sub 10, but anyway, it doesn't matter. I'll Google it while you're chatting.
Okay. And then SolarWinds and Treasury and Commerce, and you start to realize very quickly something is broken. Something is broken where we're getting picked off one by one like fish in a barrel. We're not able to take this much longer because the financial burden is becoming too big.
Yeah, even with 3,400 employees, but absolutely, the case in point.
They have only 3,000. Why do I feel like FireEye is so much bigger, man?
Yeah, 3,400 employees, top line revenue of almost 800 mil, and those are the highlights. Corporation incorporated in 2004.
And they're kind of the godfather of this cyber industry. They're one of the first companies to really come out. They've had they're known as the people you call when you go through a breach. They're essentially the company who you call upon. And so here's the deal. The conversation needs to switch. And the conversation needs to go to how do we get government, one, to align itself within itself to build cyber resiliency and cyber defense. And then number two, how do you bring in free corporations into that equation? And this requires...
Do you say free corporations?
Free corporations, meaning private or publicly traded companies into the equation of the government umbrella. Right?
Yeah.
Because it takes nation-state resources to stop nation-state attacks. And this is where the discussion gets interesting, Eddie. And I'm actually curious to hear what you think about this. But, for example, one of the organizations you're affiliated with is based out of Israel. And Israel obviously has its own experience with a recent data breach on one of the largest insurance companies. And just a few days ago, the cyber criminals released the passport of the CEO of the company. So the CEO of the insurance company, they actually released a scanned image of his Israeli passport on their Telegram channel.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
And people were posting that passport picture everywhere on social media. They weren't even changing any of the data. They weren't even blocking out like passport number, date of birth.
Do we know who the threat actors were on that one?
So, attribution is going towards Iran or some sub-Iranian Palestinian funded group, because they weren't really after the money. They're after humiliation, and they're trying to stay in the headlines, meaning they're doing data dumps and constantly trying to stay in the headlines, which is not a typical ransomware type of attack.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, disruption, right? It's disruption. But, I mean, I think it's awful to post somebody's personal details like their passport information and picture. I'm trying to wonder what bad people can do with that. You'd need a bit more information for identity theft. So let's say this guy has to go through a name change because of identity theft. Wow, what a monumental pain in the arse. But I think you'd need more information to do that. So I don't know how else that might be harmful except for embarrassment, ridicule, and obvious exposure to somebody's personal documents. I don't know. I'm not that impressed.
Well, I mean, there's an aspect to this that's extremely, I don't want to say worrisome, but if it's nation-state attacks going after private enterprise, it's not a fair fight. Right? It's a David versus Goliath, but the economical harm is the economical harm. So SolarWinds, I think, lost 25% of its stock value this week. I mean, that's people losing 25% of their money. That's the company losing 25% of its valuation. That's a significant economical impact.
So that's right. So I think what you're referring to is when a nation state attacks an individual or a corporation, it's an unfair fight. Okay, well, fights are unfair. Bad guys do this kind of stuff. So the question is, can we relate that to the physical world, and does the government protect us in that physical world? If they do, then they should in the cyber world as well. So certainly the government. So hey, look, I'm a libertarian at heart, so I think government should police, military, like law courts, and now I'm starting to stretch already. So I understand that governments will protect our physical well-being from foreign actors. They will also protect our physical well-being from domestic actors. Now, think about not just laws that would protect you from grievous bodily harm, for example, getting beaten up, but laws that also protect from mental torture or mental abuse of some kind. Well, if you have to go through a identity change, like you're changing your last name, which is a very big deal. I mean, just think it through, right? Changing your social security number, that'll probably take you 6 months. Changing your name, changing all your bank account details, changing everything, like paychecks that come to you now. I mean, it's a monumental pain in the ass. And subsequently, we can therefore say, I'm sure a psychologist would, that's some kind of mental abuse. Okay, well, then is it the government's responsibility? They seem to take responsibility when it comes to harming us mentally or physically in, let's call it, the physical world. So how is our government going to protect us when a nation state gangs up against an individual or a corporation? Should they? I say reluctantly yes. As a libertarian, I want small government, right? Be very careful how you hand power to government. Power corrupts. We see this today heavily in the news. But I would say yes, the government should do that. It is an unfair fight. Now the question is, and this is the fly in the ointment, right? How would the government protect us?
So now you bring up two very important topics, which is how. Well, first of all, let's talk about the mess that the government is in. I think SolarWinds and FireEye highlighted a huge challenge within the U.S. cyber defense system, which essentially means that FireEye wasn't the only victims of the SolarWinds vulnerability. We saw U.S. Treasury, U.S. Commerce, DHS, DOD, and I'm sure we're going to see a greater list of companies. There were 18,000 organizations that used the SolarWinds Orion product, which was where the vulnerability existed. So there was a total of 33,000 companies that were using the Orion product. 18,000 had the versions with the vulnerability.
That's right. And it's my understanding that Treasury and other US government departments, when they started doing forensics, found out that the hack had taken place in March and in June. So a lot of time to exfiltrate the data. We'll see what it's used for, because remember the Equifax hack, to our knowledge, it hasn't been used. So was that a nation state, let's say China, for example, gaining intelligence based on individuals? And so I'll explain that a little bit. What we suspect, what a few people suspect with the Equifax hacks, you remember Equifax got hacked, 127 million Americans, so most adults in the United States, had their social security number and their personal details compromised, and yet we didn't see massive amounts of fallout on a grand scale. The reason why we suspect it might be foreign actors is because what some of these foreign actors want to do is they want to find people who are, let's say, close to Lockheed Martin's design of jet turbines, or close to, a government top secret person. And so then they'll send spies in to go sleep with them. They'll send spies in to just hack their computers. So that's what we think may well have happened in the Equifax hack. Now, with this one then, okay, time will tell. This is fresh, but the hacks did take place many months ago. So now we have to start thinking about history. What's happened in this year 2020, aside from the pandemic, obviously, that might have... I'm scratching my head about a few things. I've got to bring it up, right? I've got to bring up the US election. It's just like, we're so bored of this one now, but I've got to bring it up. It's mind boggling and does not make sense to me that you have a candidate so the Republican candidate, Donald Trump, candidate for re-election, who won 60 something million votes in his 2016, but then won an additional 10 million, which I think aside from Reagan, that's pretty rare, right? In the second term that you get that big a jump. And then a vice presidential candidate, or a former vice president for president candidate, who had not been able to get into the presidential race for his entire 40-year career and suddenly gets 80 million votes. Now, this is land of conspiracy all of a sudden, because we need proof points for this kind of stuff. But it does give a question as to all of the social media nonsense that was going on during the election. And that was clear. And James and I covered that on previous episodes of this Tech Town Square. It might also explain away some of the other head-scratching moments that just didn't make sense. Are we being manipulated? Well, certainly they're trying, by foreign actors.
So
I unpacked a lot there, right?
Well, you did, but I'm glad you did. So you bring up a lot of really good points. So let's kind of refocus a little bit about this before we go down the election, because Dominion used SolarWinds.
All right.
Okay. So, and that's a fact. Dominion has confirmed that they use SolarWinds. SolarWinds has confirmed that Dominion is one of their customers. So, that's not a conspiracy at this point. That is a fact. So this goes into something that I defended, and now I'm going to have to take back. Was Chris Krebs' firing justified? So what is the mission of CISA? What is CISA's mission?
Good point.
Their mission is to manage cybersecurity across the entire U.S. That's their mission. That's what they do.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah, we don't have the intelligence reports, and we didn't have them when he was fired. And now we're starting.
But it's awfully weird that 2 weeks after he's fired, a week after he's fired, FireEye gets breached. And then a few days later, there's the SolarWinds thing. Now that comes back to Dominion. Right. And now, Eddie, here's the dagger. DNI Ratcliffe, just an hour before you and I came on, confirmed to CBS News that in the report he's going to release on Friday, which is the presidential ordered report that President Trump enacted to be released 45 days after every single election about foreign interference in the U.S., that there's clear evidence of Russia, China, Iran interfering in the U.S. elections.
It would make sense to me that those countries do not want, let's just say, a renegade type president, somebody who is not predictable, somebody who is not part of the swamp. And again, look, no matter which side of the aisle you're on this one, I'm not exactly complimenting the current president. I'm saying somebody who's, kind of a renegade, somebody who's been a real thorn in the side of people like China and Iran. In fact, in the first, so his motivation, in the first month of his presidency in 2016, he rolled back, I think it was a $400 million I don't know why we give so much money to Iran, but we do. It was part of the whole nuclear agreement there.
Well, it's bad public policy. So let's go back to the main point here, right?
Yeah.
Let's look at CISA, because what we're trying to address today, the idea I want to throw out there, the discussion I want us to have from today's show, is how do we bridge the gap between federal government and private enterprise, and how do we create a deterrent and a second thought to nation-state actors that want to attack U.S. organizations going forward? Because guess what, folks? We need a deterrent. You know why no one bombs America?
Because we'll bomb them back.
Yeah, and we've got more bombs.
Yeah, right.
Okay?
Yeah.
So how do you get someone to stop you from to stop them from doing this kind of stuff to you? You got to put up a front. And so here's where I'm getting to. And I'm going to present my case here and we can discuss it. Right. We need to get our intelligence committee. So I am going to attribute this, and please, this is no offense. I was deployed after 9/11. So please, the comparison that I'm about to make is not in the loss of life or the size or the magnitude of 9/11, but rather in the same, what happened now, what's happening in the last 3-4 years continuously. It didn't take one simple event, but it took this one simple event to make it all come together, right? Is the following. We have in the federal government 10 or 15 different bodies that do cyber. In the military, DoD does cyber on its own, Air Force does cyber on its own, Navy does cyber on its own, the Marine Corps does cyber on its own, Army does its own cyber, Coast Guard does its own cyber. That's 6 people just in the military. Then you've got DHS and CISA, they do their own cyber. Right?
Okay.
And that's 7. White House does its own, Congress does its own, Senate does its own, and then all the other governmental departments are like private organizations. They have their own CISO. They've got some information sharing and some resource tools, but that's it.
Right.
So
I see a problem already.
And you've got NSA, Secret Service, CIA, and all other federal agencies that also have cyber. And some of their missions are defensive, some of their missions is intel gathering, some of their missions is offensive, right? All have a critical part. But there was a breakdown here. There's a severe breakdown in the intelligence gathering in the cyberspace, and then how that information is sent out. And that was supposed to be addressed with the creation or the renaming and the optimization of what we now know today to be CISA, the Cyber Infrastructure Security Agency, under the Department of Homeland Security. And CISA's role was to bridge the private partner relationship, organized. They had a center that was called the NCIC, and the NCIC, which was ran by John Felker, right, a great guy, was supposed to organize all the data coming from the private and public sector and send out alerts and let people know of things that were happening. Now, it was very slow, it was very bureaucratic, and then a lot of times you'd get data 2 weeks after it was relevant, right? Because everyone classifies their stuff as top secret. So you got to redact stuff, you got to take it through the channels and so forth. That no one really approached the data as being, let's mark it as secret and only give it to people and whatever, or just redact the company name and so forth. So we have an intelligence breakdown here, right? Which essentially means that in the cyber, so think of it like this. NYP, post a major attack, right? Whether it's New York or Boston or anything like that, our first responders are always police officers, and we talked about that last week in the Back the Blue episode, right? Yep. But the reason we equipped the police with military grade equipment a lot of times is because they're dealing with armed citizens who have military grade equipment, and if they go in without that, then they're essentially sitting ducks.
Yeah, bigger gun wins. Yeah.
Right? So here's what's happening in the cyber. Here's the equivalent. We've got all the military grade stuff sitting in the military, but everyone's doing their own thing. So everyone's got a gun pointed somewhere, but no one's talking to the other guy, and everyone could have their guns pointed at one door, and someone gets in through the other door. And that's exactly what's happening right now. Right? And on the other side of it, we've got people, private citizens, private companies, who are dealing with heavy machinery coming from nation states, and they have no way to defend themselves. They don't have unlimited resources. They don't have the type of technology. They don't have the type of, they could have the skill and the know-how, but they don't have the technology. They don't have some of the ways, and it's illegal for them to hack back.
Yeah.
Right? So what we've essentially said is, we've become Los Angeles with the new DA in Los Angeles, right? We're not going to prosecute any crimes. We're not going to prosecute trespassing. We're not going to prosecute anything like that. Those are all people, we're not going to have bail. So you're like, hey, it's free reigns. I can go do whatever I want. I'm not going to get in trouble. Right?
Right.
And that creates lawlessness. And what's happening right now in cyberspace is we have lawlessness, where nation states feel like they can pick on the private people who are just trying to live, work, and get through. And they're doing so in a way that's causing a lot of damage over a period of time. And this is where now we have to come and look at this from a perspective of, so what do we do?
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and laws need to change because, as you say, it's illegal to hack back. It's even illegal to put a honeypot out on the dark web. That's illegal too, and make it detonate and infect somebody else. Yeah.
So now the discussion we need to have is, one, what is needed from on the federal level. And by the way, as you and I are talking, I'm looking at a feed, and according to FedScoop, after the news of the SolarWinds breach, Capitol Hill turns its attention to CISA. And Senator Angus King of Maine offered one of the more nonsensed early responses that CISA should get expanded authority to hunt for threats on the .gov network, which apparently they don't have at the moment. King, okay, so everyone thinks this is Russia. All right. Very agitating for me that everyone thinks it's Russia. Nothing says this is Russia. There's not one shred of evidence that says this is Russian. Not one that I've seen.
Yeah, just the historical record, but you're right, there isn't anything pointing that I'm aware of, but everybody's saying it. Yeah. So
right, because someone said Russia, it was like someone said that North Korea hacked Sony, when North Korea didn't hack Sony, but that stuck with it. Right? So here's what I think. Go ahead. You're about to say something.
Well, no, because I was going to with the North Korea thing. It was a North Korean group,
correct,
that sanctioned by Kim Jong-il.
It was a North Korean group that bought the credentials of a fired admin that sold her credentials on the dark web to a group of cyber criminals who then tried to blackmail Sony, and Sony wouldn't pay up. And then when Sony wouldn't pay up, they sold it to North Korea because North Korea was trying to get the movie The Interview off, and then North Korea ran it through one of their advanced persistent threat groups to try and get Sony to do it, and then they started leaking emails and data, and then Sony just launched the movie anyway and was just like, the damage is already done, screw you, we're gonna do it. I did an entire podcast on it with people who investigated it. There's so many misconceptions with that investigations. But by the way, the admin that was fired and sold her credentials hasn't been seen or heard of since. The last time that people have her on the grid was her crossing the U.S. border into Mexico.
Wow. Okay.
And she's gone dark.
That's interesting. Okay. So, all right, then bringing this conversation with SolarWinds back to Russia. Everybody's saying it's Russia.
It's not Russia.
What? So
it doesn't make sense. All right, it doesn't make sense. Here's the deal. Putin has no interest in doing this. Right? If Biden won, that's great for Putin.
Yeah, well, that's why he has interest in doing this. He did it months ago, right? Because those hacks took place back in March and June.
So the vulnerability was impacted between the month of March and June, in the updates between March and June in the SolarWinds, meaning they had access well before that. They had vulnerability access. They studied the code. They studied how they send out updates. They planted a malicious code into their updates that gave them a backdoor that disabled the systems.
It was smart as hell.
Yeah. It was very, very sophisticated, by the way. Extremely
But I still see Putin having motivation there because
I don't.
Biden, so he would have influence to get Biden. How does that dismiss him?
But Treasury and Commerce? Russia has no interest in Treasury and Commerce. If Russia has any interest, it's predominantly military. Right? They want to go after DOD and DHS, and they want to go after troop deployments and troop movement and strategies across the Middle East and Europe and Asia. That's what they're after. They're not after Treasury and Commerce, but there is one other nuclear power that's after Treasury and Commerce.
China, but why would they be after Treasury and Commerce? Just because of industrial espionage?
And they're known for industrial espionage.
Yeah. Yeah, whereas the Russians aren't.
China is known for stealing tools. Russians don't steal tools. Russians create tools.
That's true.
Russians don't steal tools.
Yeah, and they're very, very
China
good at it.
steal tools. Russians are really good at creating their own tools. They in-house their own tools. They're not looking for anyone else's tools to troll a network. But China's known for this stuff, right? So that's where I'm kind of going like, okay, now here's the other part. Call it coincidence, call it conspiracy, whatever. No one in the US media is covering this. But I want everyone to go to DuckDuckGo and search China paper leak. The China paper leak was covered maybe on mainstream media for 5 or 10 minutes. And then the story died. But it is the largest intel dump in world history. Done by Sky News Australia, the UK Daily Mail, I believe, and the Swedish Reporter.
And it was an intel dump of which government?
It was an intel dump of 1.95 million Chinese individuals who are part of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, who are planted in governments and corporations across the West. It had their date of birth. It had their role in the CCP. It had their job description in the company they were working in.
Why wouldn't mainstream media cover this? I mean, this is hot stuff.
This is bigger. This is showing that how China infiltrates companies. In Australia, they launched an investigation because some of the names on that list were people who worked in the consulates of Australia across China. There are executives in Pfizer, in Moderna, Chinese people who became naturalized U.S. citizens that are working for the government. I mean, everyone remembers Kristen Fang. They're trying to kill that story, the spy that was shagging Swalwell, right? And shagging other people.
Remind everybody what was Swalwell up to. Remind me.
Swalwell's a congressman who sits on the Intel committee, who had a Chinese intern in his office who was banging who we now know to be a Chinese spy.
Yeah.
Was receiving campaign donations from her, and he was the primary promoter of the Russian hoax. And so again, I go back. Russia has no interest in any of this stuff. Russia doesn't steal offensive tools. Russia doesn't go after treasury and commerce. Russia's interested in one thing: maintaining the status quo and understanding how they can defend themselves. Russia isn't trying, because Russia's trying to be a self-sustain. Russia can't sustain its economy with the former Soviet bloc, right? They use Belarus, they use Estonia, they use Latvia, they use Ukraine, they use Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. That's their main. The former USSR bloc is their trading bloc. It's how they power their economy. They sell energy to Germany and part of the Nordic countries, and that's what they do, right? They're not after stealing your intellectual property. They've never done it before. It just doesn't make sense.
I would say that they're into stirring the pot, though. I mean, we've seen that.
But so are the Chinese. The Chinese stir the pot more than anyone. They typically do it underwater. But here's the thing. The discovery of this is even more interesting.
Yeah, let's dig into this thing. Right. Go on.
Right.
So how many thousands of them?
So the timing of so if I'm China, right, I steal your tools. I steal your tools to distract you from something, right? At that point, I'm doing this as a distraction. And the distraction is timing, right? So this killed kind of, all of this news kind of quieted down a lot of the stuff around technology, right? And there's been a ton of stuff going on in the midst of this. It's right before the holiday season. People's are guards down. People are wary. People are tired mentally. This has been a very challenging year, right? We were all planning on just relaxing next week, right? You and I thought next week we'll do our final show. We'll kick our legs up. We'll go into Christmas and New Year's. We'll be back in January, motivated, refreshed, right? That's not the case.
Yeah.
right? So Eddie, we're in a place right now where, buddy, we're China is trying to distract, I believe, from the China papers. Listen, China's in a bad spot. The world doesn't trust China. China's had the worst year in its history.
Well, and they seem to be. I was sitting down over dinner with a Chinese immigrant friend of mine in the city here just earlier last week, and she was saying, I pronounce his name awfully, but Xi Ping. Am I pronouncing it good enough? Right, the president of China, right?
Xi Jinping, yeah.
Xi Jinping or Xi Jinping. Yeah, he wants to get back to the days of Mao. I didn't actually see this as strongly as I do now. Because I think for people that are, let's say, progressive, people who want to push dialogue forward, who want to have an open town square, for example, I think we find it abhorrent to our DNA, or even not even part of our being, that we would want to go back to things like that. And this is the age-old dialogue of Marxism versus capitalism. I think it's absolutely bizarre to me how people wouldn't view East-West Germany as the greatest social experiment of the 20th century to see which one of these two thought streams, capitalism or communism, is the better one. It seems obvious. And yet, people are hell-bent, and this guy seems to be hell-bent, on getting back to the days of Mao. It rings home for that saying, power corrupts. Power does corrupt people, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so I suspect that's what's going through these people's heads once they get power. And people need to understand this. So the last time I was in China was 2012, I think. And I'd hired a driver I've got a fairly big family, and of course it's one-child policy forever over there. And so it's a little bit difficult for them to accommodate a family of 5 for transportation. It was difficult getting taxis, getting restaurant tables, etc. And so I'd hired this guy for the day because he had a big car and, he took us around, and, we were treating him everywhere we went. And I said to this guy on the way back to the hotel, very late at night, we just hiked across the Great Wall and been a bunch of museums and things. I said, all right, come on then, tell me about Tiananmen Square. And he immediately, we'd become friends, and he immediately, I don't want to touch that subject. And I felt for him because I'm like, look, man, I see I just touched a nerve here. I was sitting up at the front of the car. My wife and kids were kind of half asleep in the back. And I'm like, look, man, just, I don't know, to me, it's a thing that we can talk about. He said, Eddie, if I speak to you about this, there is a commissioner. So there's a communist commissioner, somebody who works for the party, who lives on my street. And I said, oh, really? Why is that? He's like, there's a commission that lives on every street. I went, huh. So this is a person that will rat you out. Think George Orwell, 1984, right? This is the citizenry being asked to spy on themselves. Now, they'll rat you out, and there's motivation for it because they get paid for it, right? They'll get some kind of bonus for it. And he said, if somebody even hears me talking about Tiananmen Square, he's like, that's it. There'll be a knock on my door at 2 a.m. and I'm gone. So bear at it, couch everything you just heard James say and what I'll be speaking about on that, because we don't often have an appreciation. We start to say to ourselves, really, Eddie, he wants to bring back the Mao Zedong era? Yes, really. This is how they do it, by implementing these commissions on every street to rat out their neighbors. So now give the president of China a new tool, this thing called the internet, that's only come about in the last 20 years or so, right? And especially in China, slower adopters. They don't have an open market economy, so they were not nearly as advanced as, let's say, the United States and a few perhaps European cities, where we gave birth to Silicon Valley, although that was before with Hewlett-Packard, but it really took off with the internet. And so now, all of a sudden, these guys have got a tool to implement the thing that they were already doing by putting a spy on every street to rat out their neighbors. Now they're thinking, oh, wow, it's not that I'll do without that person. I can accelerate my espionage by using this tool, this internet thing. There's the nickname, the Great Chinese Firewall, right? Because Google, you're not allowed to Google over there. And if you do search for Tiananmen Square, which I did in my hotel room from Beijing, all you see is beautiful tourists' pictures and, of course, Mao Zedong's body that's embalmed in a crystal coffin. You see how it all adds up, right, to what I'm saying being, okay, maybe Eddie's not so crazy after all. And so Yeah. Where was I going with that, James? I just
Well, so you were going about freedom in China, right?
Sorry.
So you were going around the freedom in China and the fact that there is no real freedom in China, right? The story's exemplary of just that and how dangerous Xi Jinping is and China is. But this is why I believe that this is China, and I feel like a further investigation is going to show this to be China. If investigators are I don't want to say honest about this, but if they don't just fall for the initial breadcrumbs. And I'll explain. For those who don't know, who are watching the show, if you're not a technologist, if you're just a simple human being who enjoys technology, but you don't quite understand how it works. If you listen to podcasts, you've heard of something called a VPN, a virtual private network. And in my VPN, I can pretend today to be in Germany, and tomorrow I can be in Switzerland, and the day after that I can be in Hawaii, and I can be in Virginia, and meanwhile I'm sitting in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm doing everything I'm doing. And so here's the interesting part of that. Threat actors and cyber criminals know that. That is part of their skill set. They're aware of it. They know it's coming. They know how to deal with it. They know how to make it look like they're in one place when they're in another place.
Right.
So could the Chinese used some Russian tools to start this? To kind of give initial attribution to Russia, hoping that all the focus goes to Russia. Meanwhile, China keeps running away to the bank. Right? And
hang on, what are they running away to the bank with? From this particular
everything the commerce and treasury, the people who in commerce and treasury, they were monitoring their emails so they can see what people in treasury and commerce were talking about in terms of trade with China, in terms of trade strategy, sanctions, people who might be on a sanction list, their attitude. Okay, who's pro-China in the office, who's not so pro-China, who can we maybe Eric Swalwell with another Christine Fang, who could we possibly,
Trump's pissed them off so much in the last 4 years. Yeah.
Well, they don't know how to read Trump, right? Trump is not a standard politician because Trump isn't. Trump is what this country needed, right? Whether you like him or not. He didn't start any new wars. He brought jobs back to America. The economy was doing great before COVID, right? And the economy is recovering great now, even with COVID. We're seeing, unemployment rates drop, and people are doing that. And then the only places where you see suffering is places run by these radical Dems like New York and Jersey and in California and Washington and Oregon and just horrible people there are just it's terrible. And so you kind of look at that and you go, very interesting, right? Could they have used this as a way to maybe get a leg up? Maybe they weren't sure who was going to win the election. Maybe they saw what we all thought we saw, which was Trump was going to maybe get reelected. And maybe they were trying to get more, maybe they tried to get their fangs further into specific departments of government to help fight any additional executive orders or actions that could come from the White House.
Right. Yeah. No, now, you'd want to know that. You'd want to know that information. Absolutely.
And with the leak of the China papers, with just the timing of all of this, and all of a sudden, again, so I remember 4 years ago when Trump was elected. Russia. We heard about Russia for 3 freaking years.
Right. Yeah.
And then nothing panned out. And now they want to say Russia again? Come on, man.
It is interesting. Where would these China papers have been leaked from?
So they were actually hacked and stolen by a group. And then they were given to Sky News Australia. And again, 3 newspapers that verified the list. They got it 2 months ago. They started running checks to authenticate the list. They saw that the names matched. Those people were in positions in those companies. All of those people. So what people have to understand is, what is it to be a member of the China Communist Party? Being a member of the CCP, what does that mean? You sign a contract and you pledge allegiance to the Chinese Communist Party. So everything you do isn't for you. It's for the Chinese Communist Party. So they tell you, Eddie, you're you pledge allegiance to the CCP. You're now a part of the party, right? Mm. You're going to go on a mission to infiltrate company X. And they're going to give you all the certificates and all the knowledge, and they're going to train you, and you're going to do an immigration visa, and you're going to appear like a very smart person who's very capable.
Yeah.
You infiltrate that company, and through your work, you're sharing with them information about product development, about negotiations. What if you're on a procurement team and you know that it's between, let's say, a manufacturer in China and a manufacturer in India?
Right. Yeah,
and you're able to tip the scales so that manufacturing remains in China. Because think about it, the whole idea of how China was able to beat everyone else at this was a little awkward.
So beat everybody else at what?
At winning all these manufacturing contracts, of building these ghost cities and factories.
So you suspect that, well, obviously this kind of espionage has been going on forever. This particular hack, though, to our knowledge, is less than a year old. Would you agree with that?
So I'm talking about the China papers. Let me read everything I've said in the last about 3-4 minutes. I'm talking about the China papers, which the papers from 2016, and it shows a 2-decade strategy of the Chinese Communist Party to infiltrate the West across the entire world. So this even goes back to the UK and Australia and Canada,
right,
and the US,
all over the place. They've got deep sea ports all over the world now, right? They've privately bought them, right, in places like Africa and across Asia. Yeah.
But they're infiltrating massive organizations from the inside. They're planting their people, and those people are loyal to the communist China, the China Communist Party. So everything they're doing is to help China, whether it be giving him a leg up on IP, on business negotiations, on letting him know where the company's leaning towards, internal discussions. And these people are getting orders from China about what to tell and what to suggest and how to behave.
Right.
And that's 1.95 million people across the globe.
Yeah.
And that was released over the weekend. And it's a huge data dump.
It's mind-blowing that it's not being covered by mainstream media. I can't understand the motivation to not cover it.
No one wants to talk about the Eric Swalwell thing. The Eric Swalwell thing got only like 5 minutes on CNN. And the guy was sleeping with what we know to be confirmed by the FBI and a Chinese spy.
Yeah.
Who put an intern in his congressional office.
Right.
And the China papers show how they've infiltrated Facebook and Google and YouTube in Silicon Valley, and how much money and how many people they've invested into China. How there was a Chinese student organizations at one of the universities in San Francisco that was essentially a Chinese Communist Party student organization. And they were getting Dianne Feinstein and Nancy Pelosi and Eric Swalwell and Ro Khanna and all these politicians, all these congressmen and senators to attend these events with major CCP people.
Yeah, that's mind-blowing, man.
So since when do we interact with communists? When did that become normal?
And when did it become normal that what was formerly known as a civil servant gets rich by serving their nation? That didn't happen until, I would think, a few decades ago. So I remember hearing it about Pelosi, for example, but I'm going to butcher the numbers. The Clinton one's a real obvious one, right? I think Bill and Hillary were worth $4 million when Bill went into the White House. Today they're worth something like $200 million.
They were worth $7 million. They're now worth $700 million. The Obamas were worth $4 million. They're now worth like 300 and some odd million, $400 million. They'll reach $1 billion.
Service.
They'll reach $1 billion probably by the end of within 5 years, right? I mean, if Joe Biden really becomes president, then Obama will make a lot of money over the next 4 years, because Joe is essentially a puppet president, and the person who's really going to be running things is going to be hey Barack.
Like it says, Camilla will be running things.
Yeah,
tipped his hat in that direction. In fact, yeah.
So you can imagine that Obama's going to be paid $500,000 to go give a speech in China. To give a speech, $500,000, that's normal. Kind of like how Clinton took $500,000 to go speak in Russia at a time, at an event in Russia at the time when we were selling a stockpile of uranium to the Russians, right?
And
all of us
to talk to Wall Street, exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, we all realize this. I mean, I don't want to go down that path because it's really being repeated. What I'd like to focus on, though, folks, and what I'd want to challenge everyone here as we get close to wrapping up the show is this. As a nation, we can't afford to keep going through these death by 1,000 cuts. Right? We're being cut in every aspect in a cyberspace, and it's impacting us financially, and people aren't paying attention. Right? Every tree dies. Every well dries up. You can't have enough money. Eventually, you reach a point where there's no turning back. Mm-hmm. China is trying to tip the global scales. They're trying to tip the global scales financially and economically because they understand if you don't have money, you don't have a military. You don't have a military, you don't have defense. You don't have... I mean, again, guys, this is standard. If we go through Nazi Germany or Venezuela or anything like that, what's the first thing these people did? Destroyed the economy, made people relying on government. Then what they do? They said, we'll keep you safe. You don't need to worry about keeping yourself safe. And then they took away their guns, right? Then immediately after that, they said, well, wait a minute. We got to keep people united. They took away their free speech, right? And then after that, they just took everything and left people with nothing. Mm-hmm. And so we're watching this happen here, where the war isn't necessarily being launched by missiles. It's how can I steal your IP that's worth billions of dollars and make sure it's now worth maybe thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands or maybe a few millions, right? Because now more people have your IP because we stole it.
Right.
So
you asked a question at the beginning of this podcast, kind of, what should be done about this? And I sort of said, well, reluctantly, I think something should be done. And again, very reluctantly, be careful as soon as we give the government power. It's the how. That's the fly in the ointment, I called it. For our international audience, and I was talking to a friend of mine in the UK today, tip to CJ, thank you for listening. You understand something. It's going to be tremendously difficult in the United States of America for government and private corporations to collaborate so that government can protect private corporations. And the real reason why is because America was birthed on an inherent distrust of government, right? Because they saw what government from England was trying to do here in the United States. And as an example, the king's men were allowed to sleep at your house anytime they wanted to. Massive infringement. And so with that as a basis of birthing this incredible nation, now what you've got departments such as Infraguard that are trying to work as liaisons between the FBI and corporations. You've got CISA, who are trying to pull that together. It's going to be difficult because of that distrust. Corporations don't want the FBI walking around in their hallways, as it were. So something does need to be done, though. And I think we start removing some of the laws that are binding the hands of the citizenry when it comes to putting up their defenses in more of a, not retaliatory response, but more of an offensive stance.
So let's rethink cyber.
All right.
Let's rethink cyber to the same way we think of traditional defense.
Okay.
If a Chinese jet infiltrated the U.S. airspace, it would be shot down within 5 minutes.
Right.
So now let's give the government the ability to draw a cyber IT internet border and let the government monitor that border.
So you create an international law, or it doesn't even have to be an international law.
So let's start with the Five Eyes. So the Five Eyes do enough intelligence sharing, and there's enough trust between the Five Eyes. So the Five Eyes: U.S., Canada, UK, Australia, and Ireland. Okay. there's an intelligence sharing pact. It's called the Five Eyes. There's the Five Eye meeting. There's, a lot of times there's the Five Eye plus one. The other eye is Israel. Okay. And this is kind of like if Australia happened to be attacked, the Five Eyes would step up first to defend it before even NATO would do anything about it. Right. Same thing with the U.S. People always went after 9/11. Why did Tony Blair immediately answer the call? Why did Australia immediately answer the call? That's the Five Eye Pact, right? It says if you pick on one of us, you pick on all of us.
Right.
Right? And we just happen to be 5 of the 10 largest economies and countries in the world.
Right.
Okay? So you have that. So let's start with the Five Eyes. Let's establish some sort of border, and let's create an intelligence sharing mechanism and a part of DoD and DHS that's in charge of that works within that space. See, we can't think of cyber traditionally and expect to find a solution for this. We have to step outside and look outside of the cyber realm, outside of the boxes, outside of the networks, outside of IT, and go, well, there's a lot of, internet. It comes in through pipes, folks. I mean, it's not that hard. It's highways, it's airports, it's ports, right? There's a reason why we say this port is open. No different than JFK entry port or Newark or Atlanta or Miami, right? Not every airport is an international airport.
Yeah.
Right? Teterboro in Jersey doesn't take international flights. You got to land in Newark. You clear customs in Newark, and then you can take the 7-mile flight to Teterboro, if that's where you want to park your jet. Right? So there's aspects of this where we have to rethink the way we look at security. We have to rethink the way we look at how do we defend? How do we create a private-public relationship? See, no business would be in the States if the States didn't have a strong military and strong defense. If every other day the U.S. had missiles shot at it or was being potentially invaded, no one would do business here. So
and we've got good laws for businesses, good tax rates, these kinds of things.
Right.
Exactly. So let's create that environment.
So let's take that, right, and let's look at that and let's go, so what could we do?
Right.
Right. And right there and there it is, Eddie. We need to find a way to, one, centralize the federal government, meaning, I think CISA should be its own department. Like, I'm not for expanding government, but CISA is just a sub within Homeland. I think CISA should be under DoD because that's where you get a lot more money and you get a lot more resources. You get access to all branches of the military, so you're able to really coordinate. Right? And then establish a border, a port, and start creating and building tools that help keep those ports safe, that help kind of analyze malicious traffic as it's coming in and out of those ports.
And create a playbook that the world would know, so that if and when malicious traffic has come through that port and hit any American corporation, the playbook says, this will be our response, so that the bad guys know, now I've got a little bit more of a risk-reward scenario to go through here. Because right now, the upside is all upside for those guys. There's no downside. It's just, wasted time and failed hack, right? There's no other downside to them. So, yeah, exactly. You create a playbook and you say, if you slap me in the face, I got to slap you in the face twice. If you stab me with a knife, I can pull out a gun.
Well, you get to look at it from an idea of, one, we could block all traffic coming from your nation for 7 days. We can launch economic sanctions. We can...
Some countries you can do that with. It might affect other corporations. But anyway, you'd work out all those details.
Well, that's how you create a deterrence, right? You create a deterrence by saying that one guy does something, it's collective, right? It's here, if someone argues against... I had someone argue against this point with me today, and they just happen to be a very liberal person who believes that not everyone should have a gun. And I said, And I said, okay. He goes, why would you want to stop an entire country over one bad guy? And I was like, why would you want to take the guns out of 99.9% of law-abiding citizens because of one bad guy?
Bloody good point, mate. Game, set, and match, Aza. All right. Yeah.
So if you, I don't know that we need to tell people what we do, right? I don't know that we need to have a global playbook. Because that almost ties you into responding. And it also limits your response. So that's like saying that's like saying, if you kidnap my kid, I get to kidnap yours. Right? Okay, but you can take my young kid. I mean, he's a POS. I don't like it. Whatever. I've got 13 kids. I don't really care.
I suppose it would have the same effect over time if you didn't share the playbook, but you did respond absolutely every time. After a couple of years, the threat actors would start to be disciplined by their own nation, right? They're the leaders with their nation. Or the nation state threat actors would think twice. So you'd accomplish the same goal.
Well, how do you fight terror? I mean, what have we done to fight terrorism, right? We initially started attacking countries. Then we realized, well, it's not the whole country we need to attack. It's specific cells within the country. And by the way, the best way to do that is to empower the locals to be able to fight it. So now you start to build those governments up to be able to deal with the cyber criminals that are within their area. You can create a global treaty of ratification of cyber criminals under, for extradition. Right, so let's say if you're Bulgaria or Ukraine or Romania, which a lot of Russian and Chinese will utilize those nations and the cyber criminal elements within those nations. What you would tell Romania is the U.S. is going to pass a hacking law. It's 25 to life.
Right.
Oh, and by the way, Romania is ratifying that, and it's going to send any Romanian citizen that is charged. They're going to extradite his tail to go sit on Rikers Island.
Right.
You know what's going to happen to all those Romanian assholes that do this stuff?
They're going to think twice at the very least.
They're going to go and they're going to start a Dunar place, and they're going to make croissants, and they're going to be waiters, or they're going to go and work legitimate jobs as developers and software engineers and all kinds of stuff and do that. Right?
Yeah.
Because it's not going to be worth it. Right?
That's
It's not going to be worth it. Especially if you know that you can't leave the EU or you can't leave Romania, because the moment you get out, there's an Interpol notice for you, and you're going to get busted and you're going to be hauled off to an American jail. Right? The greatest response in the last 4 years to Russian hacking has been the arrest of Russian hackers as they vacation in Europe. That's put a lot of them at bay. That's a chatter. If you monitor the dark web and you look at Russian chatter and you look at some of them that say, oh, I found the back door, let's say to something here, and they go, where's that? And they go, not worth it, man. I still want to be able to go to Spain with my girlfriend and sit on the beach. I want to be able to go to France and vacation.
Oligarch money, but they can't do anything with it. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Like we'll still do ransomware attacks on companies and take $25,000, $50,000. No one has time to investigate that, but we're not going for the Mac Daddy, right? Leave the Mac Daddy for someone else. It's not worth it for me. I can make $1 million a year doing this stuff, low key, and be able to board a flight from, with my beautiful hot Russian girlfriend and go on a vacation and not have to worry that when I get there, so the FBI is going to be waiting for me to put me on a plane before I could even say good morning, right? Before I can say, dobre utro, I'm on a plane back, to New York getting prosecuted by the U.S., right? The U.S. prosecutical power fear the long arm of the U.S. to be able to get to criminals, to be able to get to terrorists is a deterrent. Now, how do you, and that's why I'm saying this does not have, like everything that I say that says Russia, they go, what we think is Russian state actors. I'm like, stop saying that. It doesn't make any sense. The dots don't add up. Russians do not steal offensive tools. They just don't do it. Historically, hasn't been done. China does. China steals anything. If you and I made a new shoe design tomorrow and put it out there and said revolutionary shoe design, it'll be designed in China within a week.
I was going to say, that's right. It'll be on the shelf the same day. Yeah. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. I think that's fantastic. I think that yes, we start to bring laws that are already in play for protecting the citizenry from physical harm, from mental harm, so that the cyber laws can reflect the exact or a similar amount of deterrent to criminals. Makes a lot of sense what you're saying, James, today. I like that.
I've been giving it a lot of thought. 3 days worth.
Good man. Well, 3 days worth of knowledge out in an hour and 10 minutes. I love it. Ladies and gentlemen, same time next week, right? 7 p.m. Eastern, James. We're going to go with
7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Tune in live. By the way, you guys can comment for those watching. You guys can